There we go. Hi, folks. First of all, welcome to our GOTO EDA Day in Warsaw. Super excited to be here. I think this is a brilliant event, and it's the whole area of EDA is so exciting. So let me just give you a quick introduction of what I'm going to talk about. So my name is David Anderson. I'm an architect at GP. I kind of figured, like, what's the best way to kick this off? Some of the things that we're going to talk about, event-driven architecture. I mean, Gregor Hulp talked about event-driven architecture 20 years ago. It's not new. Serverless has been around now for 10 years. It's not really new. The whole idea of domain-driven design is 20 years old. It's not that new. But there's something really special happening, is that as these things are starting to evolve and mature, we're getting to a really exciting time where we can start to put these things together and have dramatic results. So I've been kind of referring to that as the modern cloud. So how do we really leverage the services that are out there? So I figured rather than kind of preach about the theory of these things, I'll actually walk you through a practical example of a transformation that's happening right now. Now, this isn't a transformation that I would say is finished. It's in motion. So I'm currently an architect with GP, and I'll talk about how we're scaling for growth with modern cloud, and that's really scaling the business. It's not like a cloud or infrastructure scaling, it's actually scaling a company and a category, and that's where this gets really exciting. So again, I'm around all day, so very happy to sort of take questions and talk, because this is a really exciting area. So Ken, how did I come to this space? I wrote a book a few years ago called The Value Flywheel Effect, and that's kind of been known as a sort of a handbook for cloud modernization. With my two colleagues, Mark McKenna and Michael O'Reilly. I worked with Liberty Mutual for about 15 years, where we kind of started with on-prem, traditional kind of workloads, and we kind of developed this serverless-first strategy with the bold vision of how could we make an enterprise into a serverless-first enterprise. And now, we didn't actually get to EDA with Liberty. A lot of things that we did were quite exciting, but the framework that we developed as we tried to transform like a Fortune 100 company to use this technology, we've kind of captured the value flywheel effect. There's a really nice foreword by Adrian Cockcroft, who's the guy who basically brought Netflix to the cloud and has done lots of amazing things. And a guy called Simon Wardley, who's invented this kind of technique called Wardley mapping, which I'll share. So people often say, why should I go serverless? And often people would say, when they hear the word serverless, they really think of Lambda. And it's much, much more than that. It's not why should I go serverless? It's really when should I modernize? Because when you migrate to the companies or projects often migrate to the cloud, and then you start to see what's happening. And then you start to change the capabilities. So that's really, modernization always kind of happens after migration. And for me, that's the serverless mindset. You start to think, I shouldn't need to do this. So I describe this as like a wave of transformation. And every single company I've seen who moves to the cloud eventually starts to realize we can do this better. And for me, EDA is the way, is the better. So I'll kind of talk about the journey. So the value flywheel effect, it's really that idea of joining, and this for me is the hook. It's how do you join your business and technology strategies? If you're in the IT department and you talk about the business, that's a problem straight away. Because you want to be thinking, who's the person who owns this piece of the business? What do they need? And how can I make that happen as quickly as possible? So that's the whole idea of the value flywheel. And for me, it's 4 phases. First, if you think of a team, it's clarity of purpose. If you're talking to an engineering team, why are they doing? Why do they show up to work? If it's to implement Jira tickets, then you've lost. It's really about what's the North Star of that team, and it should be focused on a business KPI that they own and they're aware of. There's the challenge. How can you create the environment that team could do whatever they need to do to make that happen? So that's, a lot of the thing here is like psychological safety. Can you pivot on technology? Can you challenge an idea? Do you have an environment for success? So they're both very, I would say, organizational phases. The third one is next best action. With a serverless-first strategy, you can do things very quickly. So how can you get that kind of flywheel to start to prove things really fast? How can we test product market fit really quickly? How can we really evolve things? And then finally, long-term value. There's no point in rapidly experimenting if it's throwaway. Using something like the well-architected framework helps you build well and build right. So what I've found over the last probably 10 years, when you take this idea, go straight to the business stakeholder, find out what's important, create the right environment, deliver quickly, and then bake in your non-functional requirements, you start to see momentum building. And that's what we call the value flywheel effect. So I'll demonstrate how we've done this. So my current role as an architect, a practicing architect with GP, or Globalization partners, our kind of problem statement is how do we simplify and accelerate global employment? Sounds quite straightforward. It's like if I'm sitting here in Warsaw and I want to work for, I don't know, Roblox, who are based in, I think San Jose or San Francisco. I can't do it at the minute. That's impossible. They don't have an office here. I can't do it. But with what GP do, it's an employer of record platform. So GP have entities in something like 200 countries. So if I want to be hired here by a company in the States or a company in Australia or a company in Italy, they can hire me individually through GP's kind of system. So it's called employer of record, and actually GP created this category. So this isn't an IT thing, this is a thing it's a business category. So they created this category and are market leaders. So if you think, it also works for, so if I'm sitting here as an employee of, say, Roblox, I'm a permanent, fully professional employee working here with local salary, with local benefits, I'm paid whenever, so I'm like a full-time employee here. I'm remote, obviously, but I'm still working for the company, but GP do everything in between to make sure that it's a compliant kind of employment. So what this does, sounds quite boring, like it's kind of HR thing. But what this does is it breaks down the boundaries for like knowledge workers, for developers, for designers. Anyone who can work remotely, you can work anywhere in the world. So that's a really exciting kind of development. And obviously, COVID has just accelerated this. So like I say, GP are across 180 countries. There's lots of HR and legal experts to deal with all these kind of issues. And people are super happy in this platform. It's the way of working. And there's lots of different partners around the world. So, and the thing that's most interesting is the compliance. Because you, as an employee, you don't want to be out of compliance. As a customer, as a company, using our platform, like Roblox or someone, you don't want to be at risk. So there's a lot of intelligence built into this platform. So it's a pretty exciting business problem that's got it's got scale, it's got global reach, and it's moving very fast. Because like I say, it's an undefined area. I've heard the phrase a red ocean or a blue ocean. A red ocean is where there's lots of competition. A blue ocean where there's not much. This is like a blue ocean opportunity. So it's pretty much what do we want to do. So it's a really exciting kind of space to do what we're doing. So I want to talk about how we've sort of set up the strategy and how we're doing with that and how we're implementing this. So how do we unlock true agility? So there's probably three sort of, I would say, architectural principles. Now, as an architect, I'll be biased here. And this is a team effort. There's about 10 architects work in the company, and I'm one of them. So there's a whole team. So there's three architectural principles we figured out. Flexible evolution. We don't really know where we're going. I couldn't tell you where the company will be in 3 years' time. I'm not sure what product will be. So we need to be able to build really quickly. So the serverless-first strategy helps that. So we can test ideas, we can be data-driven, or we can kind of see how the market evolves. SaaS scale. It's a global company across 200 countries. There's lots of different requirements for different countries. Like we need well architected for reliability, for performance, for security, for cost, and for operational excellence. So that's really important that we have that SaaS scale. We can't have a monolith sitting in US East 1. That's just not going to work. And then empowered teams. We can't have teams that are like, we are the engineering team. We need a team who own a domain, who are fully responsible for a domain. So that's really kind of domain driven. And kind of the idea of and that EDA unlocks that. So that's that three kind of principles that we base the strategy on. So if you think of people always think about, if you have one product and you want to evolve that into a platform, what's the best way of doing that? So there's lots of kind of fancy presentations where people say, well, you take your product and you break it down. It's kind of magic. We just use microservices. There's some hand waving, and that all works. That's not how you do a modernization. That never really works. It's way more complicated than that. So with the approach we've kind of taken with one product, we've kind of decided how do we break that down and evolve that forward. So we took one key product, which is employer of record, and we extracted out, we almost like the refactoring, we extracted out a lot of platform capabilities. We kind of shifted a vertical for kind of data, to make data a key kind of vertical, and then we created these enablers to create an environment that we can rapidly evolve. So it's kind of like, so it's almost like, and this for me is almost like a version of platform engineering, but at an organizational level. So there's probably three, I would say, mechanisms that I think of that we've used to kind of drive this modernization. The first being executive sponsorship. It's really hard to transform an organization if it's 3 or 4 architects with ideas and a whiteboard. It's just not going to happen. So you need to actually make sure that this modernization is the top priority. Now, we've been lucky enough to do that. That's sometimes where I can kind of help, is that how do we make sure that the CEO or the board are behind this? And you'll often find that they want to be, but there's too many layers in between like the engineering team and the board to kind of sell this strategy. So we've been lucky enough that this is the top priority for the organization. Second, how do we sort of prevent the ivory tower of architecture? So we use the ADR mechanism, architecture decision records. So we have our wiki, and we'll have an ADR format, flat text. And if there's a decision we want to make, like ADR 002, we'll write up the decision, the rationale, and the criteria. And that's open to anyone in the organization to edit that, to sort of evolve. If you have an idea about something, if you want to bring in something, then we'll work out an ADR. And that's how we'll use to both make our decision-making visible and transparent, and also to communicate like things that were decided 2 years ago. And then enablement. For me, it's important that, this is really the team topologies thing, how architecture is an enabler. The architects don't tell you what to do. The architects will advise you. You've got experts who will help you as a team do what you need to do. It's the same with cloud infrastructure. They'll like kind of enable the organization. There's probably 4, I would say, key influences for this strategy. There's a great book called Architecture Modernization by a guy called Nick Tune. It talks a lot about domain-driven design. There's a brilliant resource called DDD Crew on GitHub. It's open source. And a lot of the techniques we use are documented in the DDD Crew. It's absolutely brilliant. It's a couple of years old. You've got like event storming, domain mapping, there's a whole bunch of stuff. Gregor Holp is brilliant. He's got this idea of the software architect elevator. A good architect should be able to sit with a team and pair program, sit and look at the system over the next 3 years, and sit and speak to the CEO about what they need to do, and be able to work in those different kind of areas. So it's a brilliant kind of concept for a technical leader. Team topologies is brilliant. They really think about how teams should be structured, and the idea of like a value team, a platform team, enablement team. It's a really important concept. Then obviously I'll be biased the Wardley mapping. And Wardley mapping I think is super important in the sense that you need to think about the strategy. How do you create and communicate strategy for your kind of leaders in the organization? So let's jump into and I've got the serverless age is where I do some writing about, evolving ideas and stuff. So let's think about, so many people are familiar with Wardley maps. Hands up. You're in for a treat. There's a guy called Simon Wardley. He's a researcher. About 15 years ago, came up with this idea of a Wardley map. And his whole thinking was, if you have like a 2x2, like strengths and weaknesses, opportunities, that's a static strategy. A lot of strategies are static. A lot of vision statements are like, we will be X by the year Y. They're like point in time statements. If you properly think about the strategic landscape of what you're trying to do, there's a lot of different factors you can think in. So come up with this idea of mapping out a strategy. So I'll talk you through how this works. So there's usually a goal at the top, where how do we evolve technology to unlock global employment? And there's an anchor persona, which is the customer. So this will be a company who want to maybe hire people in different countries. The y-axis is the value chain. So what their need, this company has a need to expand, so that's their need. And that need has dependencies, which we'll talk to in a second. So the things that are lower down are less visible. The things at the top are pretty visible to the customer. The things at the bottom are less visible. They're kind of like dependencies or enablers. And this axis across the bottom here is the evolutionary axis, and this is what makes this quite interesting. So every capability or component will evolve from left to right. A nice way of thinking of this is computers. Back in kind of like, say, the 40s or 50s, computers were like magic. Like this genesis, this magical thing called a computer. It's you know, it was in the newspaper. It was like, it's, you know, with different uses of it. Then getting into the 60s, they became custom built. And the 60s and 70s, where there were lots of different versions. They were kind of quite funky. There wasn't a huge demand. There was kind of like an opportunity space. And then as they evolved, they became a product. With Microsoft and the PC kicked in, everyone needed it. It was like top kind of, you know, you must have a computer, and it becomes really high production. And this is where they really become optimized. And then they become commodity with the cloud. It's not a question. It's a utility. I'll just rent it as needed. So it becomes from something that's magical to we're building understanding to customers need it to it's gone. And when something moves right across, it opens up new value, top left. So there's a whole way of thinking about these. So if you think of the customer need to expand, well, first of all, they need to find people. So to find people, that's quite difficult. So there's probably knowledge. Knowledge is quite kind of genesis, is quite new. So how do we that's still something that we're working on. We need integration with different providers. And there's a dependency on like country compliance expertise. How do we understand in country how to employ people? You also need to hire people and manage people. They're both two key capabilities. We want to be capability focused, not system focused. So that's why we've moved our system to a platform as opposed to a single application. There's an in-country presence, which for GP is a solved problem because that's been put in place years ago. So that's a solved problem. So really, one of the really important things is the idea of country compliance expertise. How do we codify that within a platform? And that requires resiliency. How do we change? How do we keep that kind of, you know, up to date? How do we make sure that's accurate? And that depends on technology. But we can't have custom technology. So that we need to be really careful that we can't afford to spend lots of time building custom technology platforms. So we evolve the technology over to become a commodity so we can focus on these higher order needs. So for me, that's the sort of the business strategy of GP. So let's break that down into sort of let's say, a technical strategy. So this is a wee bit more complicated. It just shows you the evolution of some things. So there's the annotations there from 1 to 5 that I'll kind of talk through. So if we start at the bottom, right? So this is an engineer's viewpoint. So an engineer just has a need for an application. So one of the things here, I'll start at the bottom. As we started this modernization, some of the things that we started with, you know, team silos. Teams don't really know what other teams are doing. Teams are by function. We're the engineering team. We're the test team. We're the product team. All right? How do we evolve those things across? How do we evolve our standards? How do we evolve engineering? So number one here is this idea of, do we shift the mindset to empowered product teams? So rather than kind of functional teams, empowered product teams. So one of the things that we used here, and good standards as well, that we actually build well. So the accelerator here was well architected, that we'd have a single standard of how we build well, and and what's the best way to build software. One of the things that was important for that was number 2 here, a modern cloud management. So we've used organizational units in AWS to think differently about our AWS infrastructure. That was able to open up some things like for our data. How do we think differently about our data? How do we think differently about our architecture? The idea of event-driven and domain-driven was able to accelerate these things as a kind of a strategy. If you've got event and domain-driven, number 3 there is EDA is foundational and the standard for the whole organization. Number 4 is observability. If you've got a very distributed system with domains and events, you need really good observability to understand, you know, how things are evolving. And then finally, serverless-first. If you had if we introduce like a continuous improvement mindset, and encourage teams to learn. There's no one way of doing things. You want teams to continually learn and evolve with the market. So that's a serverless-first mindset. So these are probably the 3 levers we've used to kind of shift our thinking from something like point-to-point integration to Event Bridge, or packaged components to bounded context. So there's lots of small things we put in place to build up this bigger kind of architecture strategy. So this is the kind of, I'd say, the modernization piece journey that we're on. So before we kind of rolled this out across the entire organization, it was almost like a proof point. So we can probably go back about 3 years ago. There was there was a monolith. It was a pretty modern stack. You've kind of got EC2 deployed in AWS, containerized, and on Java Spring Boot on RDS. So a pretty modern stack, but the problem was it was a monolith. You had about 35 teams in the same code base. It was a lot of like standing on toes, a lot of, it was very hard to put in new features, new products, because we were trying to pick apart the data model. So it was just kind of, what you can see is a bunch of problems there, maybe even like very slow release cycles. So with when you do that assessment against a modern application, extremely high cognitive burden, all the teams had to know the entire platform. And then what you start to see is like, from a continuous delivery and autonomy and well-architected, we kind of scored probably low. So as we started to pick apart, this was just the billing area. We picked apart the billing area into different domains, like accounts and pricing. So we broke them apart in different accounts and made them kind of event-driven, and actually aligned teams to these domains. So we used the well-architected framework as our kind of quality assessment. We took serverless-first, so we were kind of quite opinionated about engineers building on Lambda, step functions, event bridge, etc. We used events for async communication between domains, and we threat modeled to make sure we were across our kind of security concerns, and used SCARP, which is our continuous improvement process. So what we noticed after probably a year and a half, is that the picture changed. There was less cognitive burden because there was smaller systems for teams to work with, higher quality, higher throughput, and higher kind of business return. So this was kind of, that's what I would say, we kind of started that flywheel. So what we actually noticed, what we observed from a business perspective, and remember the key stakeholder here was the CFO of the company. It wasn't just the product owner. You started to see from 22, high run costs, high toil, low features. That graph starts to change for this year. So we call this the rate of turn. How quickly can we start evolving this area within the business? But remember, like if you think of the entire company, this is probably maybe a fifth of the capability. So it's like almost like a proof of concept. But being billing, and remember billing, this is how people get paid, so it's super important. It's the kind of cornerstone of the business. Like any good transformation, prove using the hardest thing first. So what we actually noticed then is the time to value was much faster, which improved cash flow, which made customers happy. People were getting paid. There's a better experience for how you get paid. Any new ideas, like can we do something with fintech? Can we do things with different currencies? We had lots of flexibility on new ideas, so there our billing product owners could actually think of maybe different ideas of way of doing things. And most importantly, our operational efficiency decreased 80%. So we had a lot of back office staff doing manual things around bills that reduced by 80%. Like we still need that support team, but they can work on higher order tickets. The lower order stuff we automate that away. So this builds up momentum in the organization. So this was a brilliant way to prove this strategy before we started to kind of fully roll it out. So we kind of, like I say, we started this idea about the start of 22. And then probably towards the middle of 23, we rolled out this strategy across the whole organization. So as we rolled that out for the whole organization, we put a few enablement pieces in place. So when I say enablement, I think it's important to kind of recognize that there's a guy called John Cutler. Does a lot of great kind of product writing. And it's not just about good process versus bad process. There's process done poorly will restrict you and slow you down. A good process, I would say, is more like a kind of a mindset. You know what I mean? It's more like a working agreement. There's more ownership. So you want to evolve teams to, there's no point hiring a bunch of smart people and then constrain them by making them do stupid things. Unlock the potential of your smart people that you hire. So I'll not go through this, but a lot of things in the green are more what we're trying to think about. Let's think of the outcomes. Let's think of what we're trying to achieve. Let's encourage people to work well. So these 6 outcomes, these 6 enablers, can I do that? So the first is the idea of an internal developer platform. So if we want to roll out a new way of working and again, there's around 30 teams in GP, it's probably about 200 engineers. So it's not that big. So if we want to roll out a kind of new platform, how do we accelerate how you do that? So we use Backstage. And again, Backstage is the open source project by Spotify. So again, with the serverless-first mindset, we're not going to install Backstage. So the first thing we do is, can we get Backstage as a managed service? So there's a company called Roadie. It's ROADIE. And they have a hosted version of Backstage. Brilliant. Just write them a check. We'll get that. I don't want to be installing Backstage and managing it. Let someone else do that. So this lets us enable what are the difficult parts. So if an engineer is trying to create a new component, can we give them a template that they can just get started straight away? How much automation can we bake into our system and then expose it through Backstage? So this, again, the whole idea of DevOps isn't that you have a single team doing DevOps, is that you just remove all the friction with infrastructure, and Backstage is our kind of front door for visibility, for automation, and for our kind of communicating to our internal developers. The second thing is, as an enabler, is a standard set of skills. As an architect, I don't want to be writing white papers on how people should do things, because there's a bunch of really good kind of material out in the open already. So a bunch of the AWS team have this resource, Serverless-Land. So we pretty much say, can we make our standards the same as the expert advice from AWS? That's the easiest thing. So when a new engineer starts, we just say, read that website. Well, not maybe read it all. Start exploring some of these concepts. Start looking at some of these patterns. This is the way I want you to think as an engineer. So, we've effectively got AWS writing our guides for us. And we don't have a lot of what I would say custom configuration. We try and keep it as close to this device as possible. Again, that saves us a lot of time in kind of developer training and developer skills. The next thing, and this is really important, that well-architected test. For me, well-architect, it's not an audit that happens once a year. I want well-architected to be like a concept that's alive in the company. So if there's a piece of software, people will say, is this well-architected? And that just means it's like a quality control. So what we do, every single workload, we'll do the well-architected review in that workload internally. And then we'll actually stand up kind of the quick site dashboards to make sure that we can see the findings from trusted advisor. And then there's the team-owned continuous improvement. So we use well-architected and the advice in the well-architected framework as a source of knowledge for, is this workload healthy? And I mean, one of the things that's really interesting about this is a lot of engineers, FinOps and cost, what's your cost of your workload? Often when you ask an engineer, what does this workload cost, they're not quite sure. So you want cost to be top of mind. When I say to a team now, how much does workload cost? They'll say it's $37 per month. And know exactly what that breakdown is. It's not about pinching pennies. Even if it's $1,000 a month, that's still okay, but they understand that breakdown and they're aware of it. Again, this helps with scale. Again, cost is the cost is your architecture. A good optimized architecture is well costed. It's also a really nice proxy for a carbon score. And one of the nice things you can kind of, and it puts a team in control of this. If they want to go for provisional concurrency or use a different service, that's fine, but they need to stand up behind the cost. And one of the things that I think is really cool is we have a process called SCARP. And SCARP is just an acronym for security, cost, operational excellence, reliability, and performance. So what we do is every single team, every 2 weeks or every month, we have a session where we sit down with the team and they have a dashboard with all their metrics from these 5 kind of pillars. And we basically discuss the trends. Is your cost creeping up? Is your performance time flat? Are certain lambdas or APIs getting slower? Was there an incident? Like, what's the post-mortem, the blameless post-mortem from that incident? So I'll kind of talk to the team about how their metrics are trending. And you might say, we're not worried about performance because this is a batch process, but we're really worried about security. So we'll change the conversation. But really, it's a chance for the team to constantly focus on non-functional requirements. Often teams, the non-functional requirements are squeezed out in place of kind of, product or functional requirements. So this is, we're creating time in the calendar, like shine a spotlight on non-functional, and to take out the kind of opinion on it, we'll use the well-architected framework as our kind of reference point. Plus, there's loads of advice around the well-architected framework. There's best practices, and there's, again, things like Trusted Advisor, Security Hub, and Resiliency Hub to scan workloads and give you findings. So it's a brilliant process. I mean, it's primarily a learning process for the teams. Because, the technical environment we work in is difficult. There's a lot going on, so it's good to create space to actually have these conversations. The fourth one is threat modeling. AppSec is often just a tool scanning things. The real interest in AppSec, I find, is threat modeling. And Microsoft have their secure development lifecycle, and one of the practices is STRIDE for spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service, and elevation of privilege. And when you map out the data flow diagram of your workload and start to identify different threats, it opens the team up to where the threat is, where their important mitigations are, and where the risk is. So then when you go and talk to the security, our security analysts, we can say, here's your workload, here's what it does, here's the different threats, here's our mitigations, and this is what we're worried about. And 9 times out of 10, security guys will think, brilliant, thank you, that really helps. So giving the team ownership of this process is really important. Next one is organization-wide EDA. So we use EventBridge as our eventing backbone, just as a standard. And this just helps us standardize on our domains and on our events. And this also lets us use different tools. We're exploring event catalog. So that's that shared understanding. So it's not just the events, it's everything that comes around EDA. And finally, for choice, we want to reduce the cognitive load. So when a team has a workload, you start with 4 simple services. This is how we want you to start building that workload. Let's start with these: Lambda, Dynamo, EventBridge, and Gateway. This reduces choice, but enables speed. And there's also operational overhead. There's other services that we use, but we try and simplify things for the engineers, again, through Backstage, etc. So that, I would say there's 6 enabling constraints that enable us to move at pace on a signal strategy. So the platform, as we build the platform, one of the really important things that we probably did around a year and a half ago was how we think about our infrastructure. Instead of having a single account or having several accounts, we worked out using organizational units, could we have 1 account per workload? So if you think of a domain, we'll say have a domain like billing. Billing may have several bounded contexts, like account and payroll. Each of those bounded contexts is its own AWS account. All right, so what this does is this moves away from this traditional operations where you've got a very large cloud platform team to having what we call cloud ops, where the cloud platform team are doing a lot of work, to the idea that the cloud platform team are doing very little work. Our cloud platform team are effectively AWS. So we're using a lot of sensible defaults to make sure that we can move at pace. This also means the engineering teams own their accounts. So they provision their accounts, they do their settings, they look at Trusted Advisor, so they have complete control of their accounts. There's a brilliant white paper on this, using multiple accounts. I think this is a super kind of what I would say sort of advanced way of tying in your design with your actual infrastructure. And we can use lots of the dashboards, etc., and a lot of the default settings to make sure our resiliency is quite high. And again, for me, it's a steep learning curve for engineers, but I think it's a much better way of working on the platform. So one of the things that we do, and this is it's a horrible slide, so I apologize, but it's an interesting process. So let's say a team have a new capability, like say document management. say we want to create a new workload for document management. We'll say, okay, so what's the capability you're trying to build? So we'll say, so the first thing we'll want to do is create a dev environment, a dev account. So single account, it's a dev for document management. So as a page, we'll say, let's write out the definition of this bounded context. What's the KPIs? What's the service contracts? What's the events? How are you thinking about this? So that means if someone says, I'd like to build an account called utility helper. So what does that do? I don't know yet. Right, well, that's not a capability, so let's not build that. But if it's something like document management, we'll discuss, should we build this? So then the team get a dev account. So within their dev account, they've got console access. It's pretty open, so they can pretty much do what they want. When they're getting to a point where they've built like an MVP, they've built something that's now worth they understand the problem statement better, they'll now create their test account. So this is a second AWS account. So this is now more of a component where you've got a document to a component. So our kind of gate for creating a test account is we'll do a well-architected review on that solution using the well-architected tool, usually the serverless lens. They'll register any data schema in our platform. They'll create their deployment pipelines with GitHub Actions. Trusted Advisor will be clear of findings. They'll have integration tests, automated tests. They'll have a performance test, an idea of how they're going to performance test it. They'll have a cost intelligence dashboard up and understand what that cost is. And they'll have done their stride threat model and have looked after any risks, and Security Hub is clear. Then we give them a test account. The test account has got no console access, infrastructure as code, and there's more performance packs turned on, so it'll be slightly stricter. So they'll use that test account to kind of flesh out. And then they want to move on to sort of like continuous delivery. So when the team are kind of confident that they're good to go to production, they'll then request a production account. So that's them starting like a continuous delivery mindset. So now we want observability to be live. Let's see your dashboards. Let's make sure you're tracking things. Do you have your runbooks and playbooks up to date? Do you have a correct communication channels for operational excellence? Do you have any alarms on cost? No, so be more stricter. And then once the team get their third account, which is their production account, then they can deploy whenever they want to. Again, this puts complete responsibility in the hands of the teams. So it just shows you, and this is like now there's a document management capability that's stood up in a workload owned by this team. Looks like a lot of work, but when teams start to get through this, they can do it quite quickly. And that's our workload readiness checklist. Part of that is the data standardization. We use Databricks. So every event and every business entity has got a single schema that we've defined. So if we'll have something like a customer, there's one definition of customer. The schema is in Databricks. And every time a customer is created or customer is changed, and there's an event sent through EventBridge, there's a second event sent to Databricks, or data platform, that we have a bronze, silver, gold. It's like the idea of a data medallion. So we take a lot of structured and unstructured data, and we just bring that into Databricks. That gives us a single data platform that we then do all the reports off. This means that this whole platform, all these workloads, are completely observed. And this is one of the things that's super exciting with having this type of architecture. So now, as we've stood up we've proved the fact that this is a good way of working. We've put our enablers in place, and we've stood up the platform. What does the products look like? So there's a nice quote by Adrian Cockcroft that says, you don't add innovation to a culture, you get out of its way. No, we can get out of the way from the product teams. No, they've got everything they need, we just get out of the way and let them go. Now, the pressure is now on the product manager. It's like, what do you want to build? Because we can build it quickly. That tests our product managers. So I'll give an example. So one of the things that we've done over the past few months is, if you're a customer, like a company, and you want to onboard a professional onto our platform, so you'll go through and you'll stand up that professional. So we'll go to the first domain, which is professional onboarding. It goes out to the platform, gets the compliance for that country. Say it's like, I don't know, it's Poland or Italy. Like, what are the rules? How do we ask for things in that country? We'll onboard the professional onto our deployment of record product. There may be a conversation, a collaboration with the individual around maybe agreeing contracts, whatever. We'll then create the required users and customers in our platform. We'll then go into the offer, create like an actual contract, a legal contract, and get that signed. And we'll sync all those events over to your data platform. Each of these boxes are domains, and each of the clouds are actually bounded contexts. So there you've really got like, what is like 12 actual accounts all eventing to each other. So what does a single bounded context look like? Again, it's pretty straightforward. Again, with the idea of simplicity. If you're the engineer working on one of these bounded contexts, you've got an event bridge, consuming events. If you have event bridge, producing events, there's a couple of lambdas, a few step functions, nicely separated out by business function. There's a dynamo in there for data for persistence. There's an API gateway that we've a REST endpoint, and that's also calling something else, another API gateway. So it's pretty straightforward. It's not reams and reams of code. You can visualize this really easily. If you think of it, that's almost like we've done an event storm. How should this happen? We've then created the domains. We've created the infrastructure. And now we can actually see that. It's almost like that kind of C4 model of what's the business process, and that goes right down to the infrastructure. And this is completely how we're working today. So what this means we can do is we can take key capabilities and we can think of what should we build and what should we rent. So we can decide things like advice is something that we need to becomes a core capability. Billing that we need to become, that's the business differentiator. Compliance, employment, these are the things that are important to our business. Things like documents, infrastructure, let's kind of reduce the complexity and think differently. This is a domain map from the DD crew. So we can think in capabilities, not features. And this is really important for where we invest and what teams we need to actually drive the business forward. So one of the things that we did do, now we have this platform stood up. Of course, the Gen AI wave hit. Everyone got excited about that. We can very easily say, well, let's take all our data and all our products and wrap that up into a single kind of agent. So we created GIA very, very quickly, which is kind of global intelligence agent assistant. So that now means we have an interface or an agent that we can expose to different customers for different advice. So you can just ask, like, what are the tax laws in Poland? Like, what are the benefits in Poland? So you can actually have a conversation. So we will stand this up really quickly. We've got the infrastructure to really innovate. Again, this is moving very fast. We've already hit 30,000 queries, and we're really just testing this out. This is still with a very limited audience, but we can really scale this. And again, it's completely adjacent to our core product. So it's really nice now that we can, scale the capabilities as opposed to refactoring our products. So what are the key learnings, the things that we didn't think of as we went through this kind of modernization journey? There's a couple. Again, to be very honest, with what GP are doing, this is a brand new category. Most people have never even heard of employment of record, so it's a very new concept. You know, our founder, our CEO, she created this idea of this global employment, Nicole San. So it's a rapidly growing and evolving market. So sometimes it's difficult to get clarity of purpose. We don't agree internally. Like, what's our opportunity? We have 3 or 4 things we can go after. How do we know which is more important? The answer is we don't know. So it's actually really difficult. Maybe we have 3 or 4 clarity of purposes. It's really hard to know. So defining those North Stars and understanding what we're going after is really important. Sometimes, sometimes you're wrong. You have an idea of going after something and it's not the opportunity you thought it was. So it's really hard to lock down that clarity of purpose. Like previously, I worked in telecoms or insurance. It's quite easy. They're well understood markets. With this, it's so new, it's difficult. Challenge. Again, when you're working with lots of different engineers, like this is quite an opinionated technical strategy. Like sometimes you have engineers who'll say, well, we just want to write in Java. We think it'll be fine. And you say, well, you're going to get cold starts. Maybe. You know what I mean? Like, do you really want to think about that? So we kind of have to let teams experiment and figure out what works for them. Not saying Java actually is a really good, it's good in certain cases, but an empowered team should make the choices. So you don't want to be saying you must do this. Let the team experiment. So it's the idea of allow small mistakes and enable the learning. So then they'll come back and decide what they want to do. So that's I think that requires courage from an engineering management perspective to actually allow teams to make mistakes. Serverless and EDA are still difficult to learn. You know, EDA is hard. It's not easy, but it's exciting. But you'll have conversations like, is this, is this part of this entity or that entity? And the answer is we don't know. You know what I mean? So they're really difficult discussions. And then finally, well-architected. It's like the well-architected framework with AWS. I think it came out in 2013 or 2011, around that time. It's a goldmine of information, but many people are not aware of it. So you kind of got to coach people through that. And they say it's not an audit tool. It's not vendorware. It's actually the shared advice of hundreds of solution architects. So it's a really valuable resource of knowledge. But you've got to know how to kind of navigate it because it's absolutely huge. And for a brand new developer, when they look at the 85-page document with probably 300 best practices, it's like overwhelming. So you've got to coach people, ease people into that framework. Another thing I really like this idea, our Chief Product and Strategy Officer, Nat, in moving from an operations company to a technology company, there's still certain individuals who say, what's the plan? Let's do the plan, let's build the plan, and let's build this to be perfect. And there's things that we've a hunch something might be interesting. So we were in a meeting with him once and he says, let's get scrappy. And she's like, what do you mean by that? Let's just build something and see what happens. And if it fits, let's then evolve it. So there's a whole kind of thinking around this. A guy called Nick Westergaard. It's like, it's not about the shiny new thing, a scrappy approach. It's like an MVP. Get something out there and see what works. And because sometimes you don't know what the roadmap is, so you've got to kind of test and learn and see what happens. And then from your customer feedback, you figure out what works. I think actually AWS do this, but they won't. I'm not sure they admit it. And then finally, the kind of EDA maturity. These are things that we're just kind of finding. Enterprise thinking. It's hard to see EDA at an organizational level. A lot of the traditional best practices, if you think of shared libraries, reuse, they don't really work in this space. Visibility, it's really hard to visualize an EDA system. It's really difficult. I'm not sure the answer of that question yet. And then asynchronous behavior. We all think synchronous. When people hear API, they just think REST. The API can also be an event. So it's really difficult to get people to think about asynchronously. And for me, what I think is really exciting is this kind of trinity between serverless-first, event-driven architecture, and domain-driven design. To do this at an organizational level, I think is super interesting. If you're doing this in your company, I'd love to talk to you because I think it's a really interesting space, and I don't see a lot of companies doing this at the whole company scale. And I think it unlocks real agility. So finally, the idea of, if you think of the space we're in, and especially, we're moving way too fast for annual audit. We can't check our system once a year. We need to be continually doing that. So we use well-architected to let the developers move quickly, detect and auto-remediate, and protect systems. We need to do that very differently than we've done in the past. And Serverless-First helps us do that, to reduce the operational burden, and EDA gives us a common language to think about everything in the one. That whole idea of continuous compliance. So that's pretty much it. That's our sort of acceleration story. I know there was a planned kind of book signing today, but I think we have a bunch of codes, I think there'll be more information on that later on. I think there's a bunch of codes, so we can figure out how to get you a few copies of the book. I think there might be something around lunchtime. I'm sure it'll be announced. I think we'll maybe do something around 12:30. There's some kind of contact details there. More in the book, obviously, about what the story is and how to get your own value flywheel effect running. For me, the big message is migration to the cloud is not modernization. It's a whole different kettle of fish. All right? So that's pretty much me. Don't forget the vote. As Eric was saying, there's an app there that you can give feedback. I'm super interested to hear what you think of the ideas. Like I say, we're still in the middle of our journey. It's still evolving. So very excited to see what you think. Please enjoy the event today. There's some fantastic speakers, fantastic content, and I hope you find it useful. Thank you.